For years, Officer Kent used his badge like a weapon, until he stopped the wrong man and found himself answering to someone who knew the law better than he did. Morris Brandt had driven that stretch of Highway 84 outside Valdosta, Georgia, at least 100 times before. It was his regular route home from community events, and that evening he was headed back from a veterans outreach program where he'd spoken to younger vets about housing resources and job placement. He was relaxed, humming low to a Luther Vandross song playing softly in his car, when he saw the flashing blue lights in his rear-view mirror. He pulled over without hesitation. The patrol car stopped behind him, engine still running. Morris kept both hands on the wheel. He knew the drill. Too well, in fact. He clicked the voice recorder app on his phone and angled it toward the window. He didn't panic. He didn't look back. He just waited. A white officer approached his driver-side window with a kind of swagger Morris had seen before. Not in war zones, not in courtrooms, but right here, in small-town southern police departments, the kind that came with power but no accountability. "Evening. You know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, his voice almost bored. Morris met his eyes calmly. "No, sir, I don't." "Your tail light's out." Morris didn't look back to check. "I had my car serviced last week. They checked the lights." The officer gave a short scoff. "License and registration." Morris handed it over, careful not to move too fast. The officer, his nameplate read B. Kent, stared at the ID, then glanced in the back seat. "What's in the bag?" "My laptop. Notes from a seminar I gave today. I'm an attorney." That word, attorney, landed like a small brick. Kent paused just half a second too long. "Oh yeah?" he said. "Well, step out of the vehicle for me." Morris didn't move. "Am I being detained?" "You are now." "For a tail light." Kent's hand dropped to his belt. "Sir, step out of the car. Now!" Morris slowly opened the door and got out, phone still recording. He kept it at his side, audio still rolling. No sudden moves, no raised voice. He wasn't there to argue, but he wasn't about to fold either. Kent told him to put his hands on the hood, then patted him down roughly. Morris didn't resist. He just kept asking, in a steady voice, "Am I under arrest?" And "What's the charge?" Kent didn't answer. He walked around the car, shining his flashlight at the taillights. Then, almost annoyed, he circled back. "Looks like the light's fine, but you didn't comply fast enough, so I'm writing you up for obstruction." Morris blinked. "Obstruction? You didn't follow a lawful order." Morris looked him dead in the eye. "You mean the order to step out of the car without cause?" Kent didn't like that. His lip curled slightly, and he leaned in. "You got a problem. You can take it up with the court." "I intend to." Kent handed him the citation, tore off the top copy, and walked away like the matter was settled. But Morris stood there a moment longer, steadying his breath. He looked down at the paper in his hand, then at the officers retreating back. "Officer Kent," he said loud enough to carry. "I look forward to seeing you in court." Kent turned halfway, surprised, but didn't say anything. He got back in his car and drove off. Morris stood alone on the side of the highway, heart rate elevated but not racing. He wasn't angry. He was ready. He opened his trunk, checked the tail light. Still working. Still glowing red. He took a photo of it with his phone, time-stamped, then slid back behind the wheel. The Luther Vandross track had ended. He restarted it. And pulled off smooth, but Kent had no idea who he was dealing with. Maurice Brandt didn't own a television. He said it distracted him. What he did have was a whiteboard, 3 legal pads, a worn-out laptop, and a memory like a steel trap. Every morning before sunrise, he'd take his coffee black, sit by the window that overlooked Patterson Street, and get to work. The citation Officer Kent gave him was barely 2 paragraphs, filled with vague language. Failure to comply. Verbal resistance. Possible safety risk. It wasn't the kind of charge that made headlines, but it was just slippery enough to stick, especially in a town where most judges saw a badge and stopped asking questions. Morris wasn't going to give them that option. He started with the basics. Georgia Code Section 16 to 1024, Obstruction of Law Enforcement Officers. He memorized it, every clause, exception, and case note. Then he cross-referenced Kent's past citations for obstruction. Patterns emerged. Nearly all involved black drivers. Most never challenged the charges. Those who did? Case dismissed quietly, with no follow-up. Morris tracked those names, one by one. He called. He visited. Sometimes he just left a note. "I'm reviewing a past citation and I'd like to hear your side of the story." Some didn't respond. Some didn't want to reopen old wounds. But a few did. A retired church deacon named Wallace Hightower told him about being stopped outside a Kroger for matching a vague description. That was 6 years ago. Wallace still had the ticket tucked in his Bible. He said it reminded him that things hadn't changed as much as people liked to pretend. Another woman, Tanisha Drury, told Morris how Kent followed her home one night, claimed her license plate looked expired from a distance, and ended up accusing her of erratic behavior when she got nervous and asked too many questions. Maurice took notes, recorded their statements, thanked them, never promising results, just fairness. He went back to his office and started creating a timeline. His stop, past stops, citation language, dates, names. He laid them out across the wall on printed sheets, paperclips, string, tape. It didn't look like much to an outsider. But to him, it was a map of something deeply broken. Meanwhile, the date for his court hearing approached. He filed a motion to represent himself. No private counsel, no public defender. The judge approved it without hesitation. In quiet moments, Morris rehearsed his opening arguments out loud, pacing his small living room. He practiced cross-examinations, not just the words, but the delivery, tone, posture, eye contact. He wasn't aiming to humiliate Kent. That wasn't the goal. He wanted the truth visible, undeniable, even to people who didn't want to see it. He prepared questions for the prosecution too. Was there body cam footage? There wasn't. Were there other witnesses to the stop? No. Had Kent received any prior complaints? That would come later. Morris even had a mock session with his friend from Decatur, over a Zoom call. The friend played the role of Kent, and Morris didn't miss a beat. "You sound like someone who's done this 100 times, his friend said. "I've lived it longer than I've practiced it," Morris replied. By the Thursday before the hearing, Morris had his folders color-coded and stacked. One held printouts of every relevant traffic statute. Another held statements from previous victims. Another had full transcripts of court opinions related to abuse of authority. And taped to the inside flap of his final folder was a photo. His army unit, taken in 2008, a week after they'd lost someone in an ambush. He kept it there as a reminder. That day had changed him. Taught him what control looked like, and how quickly it could disappear when you stop paying attention. This courtroom wasn't a battlefield, but it had the same stakes. People didn't think change was possible in places like Valdosta. Too many folks had gotten used to swallowing injustice like it was just another part of the air. But Morris knew systems only held power as long as no one questioned them. He wasn't angry anymore. He was ready. And word started spreading that something different was coming. Bradley Kent had been with the Valdosta Police Department for over a decade. He wasn't the type to break down doors or chase fugitives through alleys. He worked traffic, mostly. Day shifts, small patrols. Routine stuff. But over time, people began noticing a pattern, particularly the black community. He had a certain way about him, smirked more than he smut, always gave instructions like they were orders. He liked being in control, and if you so much as questioned him, he wrote you up, searched your vehicle, or slapped on a petty charge just to prove a point. People talked about him, at barbershops, at fish fries, at church parking lots, but never on record. Because in small towns like Valdosta, pushing back could mean harassment, delays with your business license, extra patrol cars rolling past your house at night. Nobody wanted trouble, so they kept quiet. They paid the fines. They moved on. There was one story that had stuck in Morris's mind from years earlier, one that never sat right with him. A young man named Dayon Patrick, just 19 at the time, had been stopped while riding his bike home from his shift at the Waffle House. No light on the bike, they said. Officer Kent wrote him up, then said Deon had acted suspicious and proceeded to search his backpack. Deon had a bag of leftover waffles in there. No weapons, no drugs. Still, Kent called it uncooperative behavior and took him in. The charges were dropped 2 weeks later, but Deon's boss had already replaced him. Too many missed shifts. Deon left Valdosta the next year. Maurice remembered writing the whole thing down in his notebook, frustrated but helpless. There'd been no camera, no witness, just Deon's word against a badge. Now he had his own entry. But this time, he had more than just a story. The community didn't exactly rally when Maurice filed the complaint. There was curiosity, sure. People whispered. A few friends asked him what happened. He didn't share details. Not yet, but the tone shifted. People started remembering their own run-ins with Officer Kent. Small ones, dismissed for years. Enough to stack up if someone took the time. And Maurice was taking the time. He submitted public records requests, looked at citations issued by Kent over the past 5 years. Found a trend, disproportionate stops involving black drivers. Many of them were for vague reasons: failure to signal, obstructed view, driving under suspicion. Nearly half of those citations never went to court. The drivers just paid and moved on. But the names, the pattern, they started forming a picture. Kent wasn't just rude. He wasn't just strict. He was deliberate, selective. And now, thanks to Maurice, his methods were finally going to be questioned. At the department, Kent didn't seem worried. If anything, he looked irritated that anyone had dared push back. He told a fellow officer in the locker room, "Guy's just looking for attention. You see how calm he was? That's fake. He's trying to build a case." The other officer didn't say anything. Kent scoffed. "Doesn't matter. I've got my report. He's got his mouth. That judge'll take one look and toss it." But what Kent hadn't counted on was the very thing that made Maurice different. He didn't come in hot. He came in prepared. A quiet defendant is easy to ignore, but a quiet attorney, with facts, questions, and a calm that cuts straight through arrogance, that's harder to dismiss. And under that calm exterior, Maurice had started collecting something far more dangerous than anger: receipts, witnesses, past interactions. A paper trail that pointed to a man who'd operated unchecked for far too long. Kent hadn't thought much about it over the years. Just another stop, another citation, another face he'd forget by dinner. But now those faces were remembering him, all at once. But quiet fear was about to meet quiet resistance. The morning of the hearing, the Valdosta Municipal Courthouse didn't look any different than usual. Plain brick walls, worn steps, a flag that barely moved in the sticky Georgia air. But there was a quiet tension just below the surface. People noticed the extra eyes. A small local reporter from the South Georgia Ledger stood outside with a notepad. 2 retired veterans from Morris's outreach group sat in the back row of the courtroom. And in the hallway, someone whispered to someone else, "That's the officer, ain't it?" Officer Bradley Kent walked in wearing a full navy blue uniform, gold badge polished to a mirror shine. His posture was stiff, chin tilted up. He sat near the front, next to the town prosecutor, a man named Dorian Winslow, who'd argued hundreds of minor offenses over the years and barely remembered most of them. Maurice entered the courtroom alone, carrying a worn black briefcase and a small stack of folders. No entourage, no spotlight, just quiet confidence. The room didn't go silent, but it shifted. People noticed how he walked, how he greeted the bailiff by name, how he stood behind the defendant's table and began arranging his papers with calm precision. Judge Bernard Tilson, a man known more for punctuality than patience, entered at exactly 9:00 a.m. State of Georgia versus Maurice Brandt. Citation number 21504, the clerk announced. "Present, Your Honor," Maurice said, standing tall. Dorian Winslow rose too. "Prosecution is ready, Your Honor." Judge Tilson glanced between them, then back down at the paperwork. "Mr. Brandt, I see here you've elected to represent yourself." "That's correct, Your Honor." "You understand your rights?" "I do." "Very well. Let's proceed." Winslow opened with a dry summary of the events. Traffic stop, non-compliance, citation issued. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. This was supposed to be simple. Then it was Morris's turn. Your Honor, he began, voice steady but firm. I'd like to submit Exhibit A into evidence, a full video recording of the traffic stop in question, taken from my personal device. It's unedited, time-stamped, audio is clear. The judge raised an eyebrow. Objection? He asked, looking at Winslow. The prosecutor hesitated. No objection, Your Honor. Morris walked to the court's AV cart and inserted a flash drive. The screen flickered on. The room quieted. Then it played. The courtroom heard everything. Kent's voice, the demand to exit the vehicle, the clear evidence that the tail light was functioning. Morris's calm, repeated questions, the lack of aggression, the charge that made no sense. It wasn't explosive, no shouting, no violence. But that's what made it hit harder. By the end, you could hear a cough in the back row, and nothing else. Morris turned to the judge. That's the entire footage, Your Honor. No other events occurred outside of what was just shown. Judge Tilson leaned back, lips pressed tight. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Winslow adjusted his tie. Your Honor, while the video is noted, the charge relates to... The video is the incident. The judge interrupted. Let's not pretend otherwise. Kent sat motionless, his arms folded tight, his jaw clenched hard enough to show the muscle. Morris returned to his table and opened a new folder. Additionally, Your Honor, he said, I've compiled a list of prior traffic citations issued by Officer Kent over the last 4 years, requested through public records. I'll be submitting these, along with testimonies from a few individuals who experienced similar stops with near-identical language used in the charges. Now people really started paying attention. The judge raised a hand. Let's handle one thing at a time, Mr. Brandt. The obstruction charge. You're challenging its validity based on this footage? Yes, sir. The judge nodded slowly. We'll recess for 20 minutes. I want to review the citation, the video, and the officer's report again before proceeding. Morris sat down, hands folded. Kent stood up too quickly and walked out of the courtroom. Outside in the hallway, a man shook Morris's hand. I didn't know you were that, Brandt. My brother served with you. Said you were quiet but didn't miss a thing. Morris smiled faintly. Still don't. Back in the courtroom, people were whispering now. The judge had seen the tape. The prosecution didn't look so sure anymore. And Kent, who had walked into that room certain of his grip on the process, was now watching it shift under his boots. And then Morris pressed play. When court resumed, the atmosphere had changed. People weren't just sitting quietly anymore. They were leaning forward, waiting, watching. Officer Kent hadn't returned to his seat. Instead, he stood in the hallway, arms crossed, talking in low tones to someone on the phone. His face was pale under the fluorescent lights. Inside, Judge Tilson called the room to order and adjusted his glasses. Mr. Brandt, he said, your video has raised several legal questions, particularly about the justification for the obstruction charge. I'd like to proceed with your direct response to the incident. Morris stood. No theatrics, no drama. Just calm, Your Honor, he said. What you saw in the footage is the entire encounter. No escalation, no resistance. I asked clear, lawful questions. I complied without aggression. The citation filed against me was not only unnecessary, it was retaliatory, designed to penalize me for asserting my rights. The judge glanced at the prosecutor. Mr. Winslow. Winslow cleared his throat. We acknowledge the defendant's cooperation. However, the officer claims the delay in exiting the vehicle created a safety concern. Morris didn't flinch. Respectfully, Your Honor, being calm is not obstruction. Asking questions is not resistance. And concern is not a chargeable offense. The judge tapped his pen once, then leaned forward. I agree with the defendant on that point. The room stayed silent, but the tension was thick enough to feel. Then Morris opened another folder. I'd like to submit further evidence, a pattern of questionable stops performed by Officer Kent over the past several years. Here are 14 citations, all involving black drivers, issued for vague infractions with nearly identical language, Most resulted in dismissals or fines. Several of the individuals provided written statements. He handed the documents to the clerk. Judge Tilson flipped through the first few pages. How did you obtain these? Public records request, filed 1 month ago. You planned this before your hearing. I did, Your Honor. The judge looked up slowly, studying Morris for a moment. Why? Because this wasn't just about me. It was about what keeps happening when no one says anything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm made the point sharper. Outside, more people had gathered. A local podcast had shown up with a microphone and a camera. News traveled fast in towns like Valdosta, faster than anyone would admit. And Morris Brandt had become the center of it, not because he was loud, but because he wouldn't let it drop. Inside the courtroom, Kent finally returned. He took the witness stand, looking irritated rather than worried. Morris approached the podium. Officer Kent, you stated in your report that I was verbally resistant. Could you clarify what that means? Kent shifted. You refused to comply immediately with my order to exit the vehicle. Did I raise my voice? No. Did I make any physical threat? No. Did I ever say I would not exit the vehicle? Kent hesitated. You delayed. Is asking if I'm being detained a delay? Kent glanced toward Winslow, who gave nothing back. Morris stepped closer. Officer Kent, do you believe that asking a question makes someone guilty of obstruction? Kent's jaw tightened. Depends on the situation. Right. So in this case, where I was calm, respectful, and cooperative, you filed obstruction charges based on a few seconds of hesitation. Kent didn't answer. Morris leaned back. No further questions. The judge looked tired now. Tired of the obvious imbalance. Tired of the game. He dismissed Kent from the stand and turned to the prosecution. I'm giving you 2 options, the judge said, his tone flatter now. You can move to dismiss the charge, or I can render a verdict. Either way, we're not proceeding as if that video didn't happen, Winslow conferred with Kent. Kent looked like he wanted to argue, but even he knew the tide had shifted. We move to dismiss, Your Honor. Motion granted, just like that. But Morris didn't sit down. He raised one hand. Permission to make a brief statement, Your Honor? The judge nodded. I came here prepared to defend myself, not just because I believed I was right, but because I believed this process could still work, that a man could walk in here with nothing but a camera and the truth, and not be punished for it. I'm asking the court to consider reviewing the officer's past cases, particularly those involving similar charges. The judge didn't respond right away. Then he said, We'll review your submissions. Court is adjourned. As people stood to leave, a man near the back whispered, He just pulled the whole curtain back. But it didn't stop there. Others had seen that same face. The courthouse door hadn't even shut behind Maurice before his phone started ringing. Local numbers. Unknown numbers. People calling to ask, to thank, to share. Within 24 hours, the South Georgia Ledger ran a piece titled, Man represents himself in court, gets obstruction charge dropped after playing his own video. It didn't mention race. It didn't mention patterns. But the image that ran with the article, Morris in a grey suit, walking calmly out of the courthouse with a file in hand, spoke louder than the headline. That weekend, a woman named Yolanda Drew showed up at Maurice's office without an appointment. She stood at the door holding a small manila envelope. You don't know me, she said, but Officer Kent stopped my husband last year. Wrote him up for aggressive tone. That's all it said. She passed him the envelope. Inside was a copy of the citation, and an audio file. Morris played it later that night. Her husband's voice sounded tired but polite. Kent's sounded irritated, then impatient. There was no aggression, just fatigue. Morris added it to the folder. Over the next 2 weeks, 7 more people came forward. One had a cell phone photo of a citation. Another brought their son, who'd been ticketed walking home from school for obstructing foot traffic on a residential sidewalk. The charge had quietly disappeared, but the record stayed. Each story fit a pattern. Vague accusation, heavy-handed authority, no footage from police. and almost all of them came from black residents. The courthouse clerk even noticed. She pulled Morris aside in the hallway one morning. "I'm not supposed to say this," she whispered, "but I've seen these kinds of cases come through for years. Nobody ever fought it like you did." Morris kept his head down and continued working. Meanwhile, Kent was trying to act like nothing had changed. He still showed up in uniform, still worked patrol. But things were different. People watched him now. Store owners didn't greet him like before. One teenager pulled out his phone and started recording as Kent walked into the gas station. Kent snapped. "You filming me for no reason?" The kid said. "You give people reasons." It spread. Then a local pastor, Reverend Jerome Baines, invited Morris to speak briefly after Sunday service. Morris didn't want to. He wasn't a preacher. But the Reverend said, "You don't have to be. Just show people they're not crazy for feeling what they've felt." So Morris stood before a packed church hall and spoke for just 5 minutes. He didn't call out Kent by name. He didn't shout. He simply said, "It's hard to explain to people who've never experienced it, what it feels like when the system smiles at the people hurting you and tells you to move on. But you don't have to move on. You can stand your ground, with your words, with your proof, with your rights." That's what I did. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds longer than expected. Then came the applause. Not wild, not loud, just steady, deep, real. And with that, the dam finally cracked. 2 former officers reached out, retired, long removed from the force. One confirmed that internal complaints against Kent were redirected to a supervisor who routinely buried them. Another admitted he'd seen Kent stretch the truth on reports more than once. The ledger ran another piece. This one had names, quotes. It still didn't call Kent a racist, but it laid out the numbers, the pattern, the silence. People were connecting the dots on their own now. Even the city council took notice. A proposal for a civilian oversight board, tabled 2 years prior, suddenly resurfaced. People started attending meetings again, asking about data, demanding accountability. And in the middle of it all, Morris just kept working. He didn't make speeches. He didn't go on camera. He spent his days meeting clients, responding to calls, helping other drivers who now wondered whether their tickets were worth contesting too. One man said, "You got that badge to blink. Nobody's done that before." Maurice didn't smile. He just nodded once and handed the man his paperwork. Because it was never about making someone blink. It was about proving the game wasn't rigged beyond repair. Now it wasn't just Morris versus Kent. It was the whole town watching. The courtroom was fuller than it had ever been. Not because of some viral video or political stunt, but because word had gotten around, Officer Bradley Kent was being brought back to answer questions, and this time, not by reporters or administrators, but by the same man he tried to silence with a bogus charge. Morris sat at the same table as before, only now he wasn't the one on trial. This hearing was part of an internal review ordered by Judge Tilson, based on the evidence and formal request Morris submitted weeks earlier. It wasn't a criminal trial, not yet, but it was public, and for the first time, Kent had to face consequences without a badge to hide behind. He took the stand, dressed in a navy suit, not his uniform. No gun, no shield, just a man under oath. Morris stood, adjusted his notes, and looked directly at him. The silence before he spoke made the tension throb like a drumbeat. "Officer Kent?" he began. "Do you remember how many traffic stops you made in the year prior to my citation?" Kent squinted, like he was already annoyed. "Not exactly, no." Maurice held up a printout. "According to department records, you logged 348 stops. Does that sound right?" "Could be. Out of those, 211 involved black drivers. That's roughly 60%. Would you say that reflects the demographics of the area?" Kent shifted. "I stop vehicles based on violations, not demographics." Maurice didn't blink. "So it's just coincidence that the majority of your citations went to black residents?" Winslow, now seated in the rear as a quiet observer, flinched at the question. The panel of 3 administrators overseeing the review didn't object. One of them, a sharp-eyed black woman named Marianne Duggar, scribbled something on her notepad. Maurice continued. Let's go back to my stop. You claimed I was verbally resistant. Can you define what you meant by that? I gave you an instruction. You didn't follow it right away. So, again, asking if I was being detained, that's resistance? It's non-compliance. Did I threaten you? No. Raise my voice? No. Were you ever in danger during that stop? Kent sat back. You never know with people. I don't wait to find out. The room stiffened. Maurice waited a moment. Then calmly. So your reasoning for filing an obstruction charge wasn't based on my actions, but on your assumptions. Kent didn't answer. Maurice took a step forward. Officer Kent, are you aware that 14 of your past obstruction citations were dismissed due to insufficient cause? That's not my decision. The court dismisses them. Right. But you wrote them. You initiated the charge. You made the decision to turn minor stops into criminal records. You were the pattern. Kent's lips parted like he wanted to respond, but nothing came. Maurice set a file on the table. This is the testimony of Dion Patrick, ticketed and arrested at 19 for suspicious behavior while riding his bike home. Lost his job over it. That charge was dropped. That report came from you. He held up another. Yolanda Drew's husband, ticketed for aggressive tone during a routine license check. Dropped. Your name's on it too. He pointed to a third. And this one? A 14-year-old stopped walking home from school. Cited for obstructing the sidewalk. That one never even made it to court. Tossed out by a judge. Guess who filed it? Maurice paused. You created paperwork that made these people look dangerous on record, even when nothing happened. You handed out accusations like warnings. But I wonder, Officer Kent, how many people just paid the fine or stayed quiet because they thought no one would believe them over you? For a split second, Kent's face broke. Not remorse, but fear. One of the administrators leaned into her mic. Officer Kent, do you deny that your use of obstruction citations has been inconsistent with department standards? Kent stammered. I follow what I've been trained to do, Maurice interjected, voice still low, or what you knew you could get away with. That line hung in the air. The lead administrator called for a brief recess. When they returned, Kent looked smaller somehow. Less sure, less protected. Maurice didn't gloat. He didn't crack a smile. He simply sat down, folded his notes, and waited. Outside the courthouse, a group of high school students stood waiting, holding small signs that read, "Know your rights." Someone had printed off copies of Maurice's original video transcript and passed them out. He hadn't expected that, but he appreciated it, because this was never about one stop. But Maurice wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted something more. Maurice Brandt wasn't the kind of man who raised his voice. People in Valdosta had seen him at town meetings, fundraisers, veterans' picnics. He showed up early, left late, always with that same steady presence. He didn't talk about himself much. But if you asked, you'd learn he'd served 15 years in the army, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Bronze Star, honorable discharge. And then, instead of retiring quietly, he went back to school. Law school, University of Florida. Full scholarship. He could have left Valdosta behind, moved to Atlanta or D.C., taken a corporate position. But he didn't. He came home. He rented a modest office 2 blocks from the courthouse and offered legal help to veterans and low-income families. He charged almost nothing when he could afford to. Some people tried to pay him in vegetables from their gardens or plates of ribs from Sunday barbecues. He accepted both, with a smile. His days were simple. Court in the mornings, consultations in the afternoon, and a quiet dinner in the evening. Usually alone, but never bitter. Maurice wasn't chasing recognition. He just didn't like seeing people pushed around, especially by men like Bradley Kent. That night, after the traffic stop, Maurice didn't call anyone. He didn't post about it. He sat in his apartment above his office, watched the footage twice, and wrote down everything he remembered. The time, the words exchanged, the exact moment Kent's tone shifted. Then he opened his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. labeled Misconduct, VPD. Inside were notes, statements from past clients, ones who said they'd been harassed, searched without reason, ticketed for things that didn't happen. Morris had listened to them, documented the stories, but until now, there hadn't been enough evidence to go anywhere with it. Kent's name showed up in 5 separate accounts. Morris stared at those pages for a long time. Then he added his own name to the 6th. The next morning, he made 3 copies of the video file. One on a flash drive, one to upload later to a secure cloud, one on a disk labeled and locked away. He filed a formal complaint with the police department. Quietly. No press. No noise. Just the facts. Then he went back to work like nothing happened, drafted a will for a retired sergeant, helped a single mother finalize a custody agreement, answered 2 letters from incarcerated veterans asking for help on appeals. But the whole time, he was building a case. Morris knew better than to rely on justice without preparation. That came from combat and courtrooms both. Never show up empty-handed, never assume the system would fix itself. He started reviewing body cam request procedures, memorizing Georgia's municipal codes around traffic stops and obstruction charges. He reached out, discreetly, to a former army buddy, who now worked as an investigator in nearby Decatur. He sent over the footage, asked for insight on voice analysis and aggression patterns in law enforcement stops. "You gonna file this?" the friend asked. "Already did," Morris said. "But I'm going a step further. You hiring an attorney?" "No," Morris said. "I'm representing myself." His friend didn't laugh. He just whistled under his breath. "Don't underestimate how much they'll want to bury this. I'm counting on it." By Friday, Morris had collected 6 previous complaints filed against Kent. 3 internal, 3 informal. None had led to discipline. All had disappeared into departmental dead ends. But Morris had something they didn't. Evidence. And a voice that wasn't rattled by uniforms or stone-faced judges. He took the citation, filed a formal court challenge, and submitted a request to serve as his own counsel. A clerk at the courthouse gave him a double take. "Wait, you're the defendant?" He smiled. "In this case, yes." She shook her head slightly and handed him the stamped paperwork. "Well, good luck." He didn't need luck. He needed attention to detail. Morris didn't see this as a personal vendetta. He'd been stopped before. He'd been called worse. But this felt like the moment to finally call it what it was, and make it public, and he wasn't about to let this one slide. The review board took 3 days to deliberate. In a town like Valdosta, that was a long time for something that didn't involve a body or a scandal. But people watched. They waited. Not because they thought Bradley Kent was going to prison, this wasn't that kind of proceeding, but because this was the first time in years that accountability even looked possible. Morris didn't attend the announcement hearing for attention. He came because it mattered. He wore the same grey suit, same calm expression, sat alone near the front, a single notepad in his lap. The board entered the courtroom at 9:07 a.m. sharp. 3 members. Neutral faces. Nothing dramatic. Chairwoman Duggar, who hadn't spoken much during the prior sessions, did all the talking this time. "We have concluded our internal review of Officer Bradley Kent's record, conduct, and the pattern of citations brought forth in Mr. Brandt's submission. This review included testimony, video evidence, public records, and historical citation data." She paused, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at Kent. "It is the board's recommendation that Officer Kent be suspended without pay pending a full departmental investigation into his conduct. We are also recommending that the department reopen and re-examine 17 of his past obstruction cases, and that any findings be forwarded to the district attorney's office for potential legal action." There was no cheering, no gasps, just a silence that felt like a weight being lifted. Kent didn't speak. He sat frozen, his attorney whispering something into his ear that clearly didn't register. His grip on the table tightened, knuckles showing white. Morris, meanwhile, didn't move. He looked down at his notepad, closed it slowly, and stood. He didn't need to hear any more. As he walked toward the door, Chairwoman Duggar added, Lastly, the board would like to acknowledge Mr. Brandt for his thorough, respectful, and lawful pursuit of justice. It has led to a necessary moment of reflection for this department and this town." Morris gave a polite nod, then exited quietly. Outside, the same local reporter from the Ledger was waiting. "Morris, just one question. What made you decide to take this all the way?" He glanced at her, his tone steady. "Because people like Officer Kent count on no one having the time." And then he kept walking. Back at his office, the phone didn't stop ringing. Veterans, students, teachers, church leaders. Even a judge from a nearby county left a message. "You did something real. Let's talk about getting more legal resources into the schools." But Morris didn't celebrate. He went back to work. He spent that afternoon helping a woman fill out paperwork to get custody of her grandson. Later that evening, he met with a young barber who had just received his first traffic citation and didn't know how to challenge it. Maurice sat across the table, read the ticket carefully, and said, "This one's thin. We'll get it tossed." The young man smiled. "You ever think about running for office?" Maurice chuckled. "Not in this lifetime." "Why not? You're already doing more than most politicians." "I'd rather build something that lasts than campaign for something temporary." He meant that. Later that night, Morris sat alone with a single sheet of paper in front of him. It was a new case. Not about Kent, not about traffic stops, just a basic rental dispute involving an elderly woman whose landlord was trying to evict her after 19 years. He picked up his pen and wrote, "Start with the lease, then ask for payment history." Because justice wasn't about headlines. It was about the small things, the overlooked things, the things people gave up on because no one had ever helped them believe they could win. Kent would likely never wear that badge again. But Morris hadn't done this to remove a man. He'd done it to remind a town. That silence wasn't safety. That calm didn't mean surrender. That standing up didn't require shouting. It required showing up, with your truth, your receipts, and your spine straight. But what happened next left the biggest mark. Weeks passed. The heat of summer started to ease into something almost manageable. Valdosta kept moving. Trucks still rumbled down Patterson. Kids still ran through sprinkler arcs in front yards. But something underneath had shifted. Quiet, steady, permanent. It started small. A young woman named Kaylin Hoskins, who had been ticketed 2 years ago for failure to yield by Officer Kent, showed up at the courthouse with her paperwork and asked for her case to be reopened. She said, "I paid it because I didn't think I had a choice. Now I know I did." Others followed. A group of college students from Valdosta State started hosting weekend workshops. Know Your Rights sessions, free to the public. Morris helped them draft their outlines. He refused to be the face of it, but his influence was there in every bullet point and every piece of advice they shared. The city council held a public meeting to discuss forming a civilian oversight board for police complaints. It wasn't just talk this time. There were sign-up sheets, volunteers, minutes recorded and published. People were paying attention. And down at Stokes Community Center, a retired teacher named Evelyn Greer launched a local coalition for court support. Folks who'd sit with defendants during hearings, keep eyes on the process. Take notes. Show presence. Not intimidation, not confrontation, just eyes. Morris kept to his routine. He didn't make speeches. He didn't agree to interviews outside the Ledger. But when people knocked on his office door, he made time. He helped with leases, traffic disputes, restraining orders. No case too small, no person too unimportant. One afternoon, a teenage boy named Jalen stopped by with his uncle. He wasn't in trouble. He wanted to learn. "Someone said you used to be a soldier," Jalen asked shyly. Maurice nodded. "I was. And now you're a lawyer." "Still am." Jalen hesitated, then asked, "Which one was harder?" Maurice thought about it, then said, "Neither. They're just different kinds of battles." Jalen nodded, thoughtful. "I want to do what you do. Help people." Maurice smiled. "Then start by listening more than you talk. Pay attention. Keep your paperwork straight, and never show up empty-handed." That same day, Morris received an envelope from the district attorney's office. Inside was a letter confirming that 5 of Kent's previous obstruction cases had been formally dismissed. 2 of the individuals had already been notified. The letter ended with, "Thank you for bringing these matters to light." Morris folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer. No frame, no announcement. That night, he walked to the corner store. The clerk, a young man he didn't know by name, paused while ringing up his bottle of water. "Hey, just wanted to say thanks. My cousin got pulled over by that same officer. Said he never felt safe saying anything. You made him feel like he wasn't crazy." Maurice nodded once. "Tell him he wasn't." And walked out. The street was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt forgotten. It was alert, aware, watchful. Back at his apartment, he stood at the window, sipping the water slowly. A car rolled by, windows down, music drifting low. A couple walked their dog on the far sidewalk. No blue lights, no confrontation. Just people, moving forward. Change doesn't come in waves, it comes in inches. And sometimes it takes one man with a phone and the will to fight for the inches. Morris never thought he'd be anyone's example. He wasn't after a spotlight. He just wanted the truth to matter. And in Valdosta, finally it did. So he turned off the light, sat back at his desk, and opened the next file. Another client, another case, another inch forward. If this story moved you, or made you think differently about justice and courage, take a moment to subscribe. We're telling stories that matter, one truth at a time.